This episode of the Forged by Trust podcast is brought to you by peopleformula.com. Unlock the interpersonal skills for forging trust and healthy relationships for maximum success in all aspects of your life from a global behavioral expert, best-selling author, and master spy recruiter. If you're looking for an acclaimed keynote speaker, trainer, or coach that can elevate you and your organization to stratospheric success, then check out Robin Dreek, me, and my offerings at peopleformula.com. Coming up next on the Forged by Trust podcast.
There's no greater rush than finding a skip that you've worked for a long time, no different than you finding a spy or a fugitive. It was just learning communication skills. It was knowing how to talk to different people in different communities. And there's one word that encapsulates everything that I do, and it's called empathy.
Welcome to the show. I'm Robin Dreek, and on the Forged by Trust podcast, we decode the interpersonal communication skills of the world's most acclaimed forgers of trust. We unlock the skills and techniques from spies, spy recruiters, master interrogators, globally recognized behavioral experts, C-suite executives, entrepreneurs, acclaimed authors, and thought leaders. Each episode provides specific actions that you can immediately apply to any aspect of your personal or professional life. In today's episode, Hide and Seek with the Skip Guru, we are speaking with acclaimed master skip tracer and trainer Alex Price. Alex is a nationally recognized expert on the art of skip tracing and cyber tracking. Alex's skip tracing experience goes back to the mid-1980s, where he began his career in skip tracing with Barnett Bank as a field representative, collecting delinquent accounts and recovering defaulted collateral. On today's episode, we cover the skip tracing history, pretexting, the importance of humanizing, empathy, and how you can connect and forge trust with just one word. Don't forget to like the show, leave a review, and share it with someone else who you think could benefit from it. Now sit back, relax, and join my conversation with friend of the show, Alex Price. Alex.
Good morning, sir.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I am doing fantastic. Even better now that we're having a conversation.
Yes, sir. I'm looking very forward to it.
Me too. I had never heard the word skip tracer before I met you. Now, after you explained it and I looked at you, it's like, oh yeah, I get that now. But that is something that I never heard before. And so that's why I think this is going to be a great episode. And for those tuning in, Alex is going to explain what skip tracing is. So how did that journey start? I mean, how did you grow up and become this person that wants to find the unfindable?
Well, I might have actually, in all reality, kind of been born into it. My dad was a Chevrolet dealer. Him and his partner had dealerships throughout South Florida. So I actually went on my first repossession when I was probably 10. For any reason, the dealer was on the hook to pay off the balance. Mm-hmm. And a local semi-celebrity, let's say, from a local news station bounced the down payment on his new car. So the finance company called that chip in, and my dad went up and knocked on the door, and I backed at like 10 years old, backed a Corvette sitting on a telephone book out of the guy's driveway. So that's my earliest memory of his world. And it wasn't until years later after the Army, when I got out of the Army, other than being a law enforcement officer, there weren't a lot of employment opportunities for the skill sets I learned in the Army.
Right.
So I was a bouncer and proverbial South Florida beach bum. And I met a young lady that I told my dad was special. And he said, well, you need to get civilized and get a real job. And he got me a job through a friend of his who was a bank president. And I was what was called a field representative. I knocked on doors, and I asked the manager one day what happened to all the files. The people weren't at the locations they sent me. And he explained the whole credit process to me, and said they're in a big filing cabinet in the other room once they go through the churning process of this person to this person to this person. I asked him, that sounds like fun. Could I take a look at him? And he literally laughed at me and he said, sure. And I tell you what, for every one you find, I'll give you a $100 bonus. And when you're talking mid-80s, $100 was a pretty big deal. I mean, I think I remember my first paycheck in boot camp was like $480 for for a month.
Right.
So it wasn't too long after that, I was making more in the bonus than I was in salary.
Right. So for our listeners that don't know the background of this, I think that's a really good intro to kind of explain. So what then is exactly a skip tracer like yourself? And you alluded to a little bit there. Is that the same as a repo man? So what is a skip tracer? Is that a repo guy? I mean, what is that world?
Okay, if you look at the word skip or skipped, it's a word that can go back to Europe.
Mm-hmm.
The earliest that I found in all of my research is a gentleman by the name of Eugene Francois Vidocq, who was a criminal basically, who became an informant for Scotland Yard, and he became Europe's first private investigator. And he wrote a book called Scotland Yard's Secret Weapon Skip Tracing. So the word skip or skipped started in Europe as something to define someone who had left without paying their restaurant or bar tab or their lodging. And
Right.
maybe it was a regional term instead of saying they ran off, but you fast forward it to the Americas years later, it was picked up by the banking industry, fintech world, et cetera, to describe someone that has momentarily disappeared to avoid paying a contractual debt. But it's basically used in every industry I can think of. When people like yourself ask me that question, if you're on your high school reunion committee and you sit down with a list of names to find them, to invite them to the upcoming reunion, you're skip tracing.
Right.
You know a little bit about that person from when you knew them in high school, enough to start you down the path to gather new info. That's what I do, just at a higher level.
Right.
And it's adult hide and seek for high stakes.
Right. I love
and a lot
that.
a lot of people attributed, you even did it one of the first times you and I ever talked, to the bounty hunting world. Well, another little, I'm a history nut. So another little tidbit, the word bounty hunter was never used, not one time, in the Old West. They
Right.
were actually called skip tracers back then.
Huh.
The word bounty hunter did not start until the late 40s, 50s, when they started the dime novels on the exploits of Frank and Jesse and so forth. They needed a sexy term, and there was a bounty offered,
Sure.
for the person dead or alive. So it was one of the great Western legends that said, hey, why don't you call them bounty hunters? And it stuck. So even their initial title was called a skip tracer.
You obviously came into doing skip tracing before the internet really took off, where I'd imagine it required, a lot of maybe phone calls, database searches, getting into courthouse records. I mean, I don't know what it really entailed, but there obviously was a lot more need for interpersonal communication and developing relationships in order to be successful. What are some of the things that you learned along the way? And did you learn, was your background in the Army helpful in that? Maybe, working with your dad? I mean, where did you develop your interpersonal skills that made you successful before you could actually become the best analyzer of data?
It was, when I first started, we did not have a computer at the bank I worked at. Everything was done on paper, assignments. Everything was done, over the phone, in person. I can distinctly remember getting our first beeper thinking I was James Bond.
Me
And
too.
the first cell phone, the one you carried in a bag over your shoulder, weighed about 20 pounds.
Yep.
I remember my first one of those, and I thought I was Sonny Crockett because I worked in the Miami area. So there wasn't a lot of technology. You had a paper assignment, you had the credit application, and you had something that was called a crisscross directory or a Bresser's directory, which was basically a phone book on steroids.
Mm-hmm.
So 99% of the job was in the field, talking to neighbors, talking to shopkeepers. If I wanted something from the courthouse, I had to go in person, wait in line, use microfiche, pay a penny a page. If I had to get something that was outside of my area, I had to make a friend that would go do that and snail mail it to me. So it was just learning before it was even a topic, communication skills. It was knowing how to talk to different people in different communities, especially a melting pot like South Florida. You would dress completely different in one area of Miami versus another. And, years later, one of the things that I did that I didn't even know it was a term to many, many years later is I would do a lot of mirroring.
Mm-hmm.
I would dress to fit the neighborhood. I would talk to fit the neighborhood or the party I was talking to, the pitch, the tone, the verbiage, everything. So it wasn't until years later that some of the techniques that I personally developed or were taught to me by some legends in the industry. I've been one of the most blessed people you could ever meet, that along the way, legends in my industry like Rusty Ansell, Millard Land, Ron Brown, Harvey Altez took me under their wing as a 20-something-year-old kid and taught me the industry. And now, fast forward to almost 60, I've got legends like you, Chris Hagnaghi, Chase Hughes,
Navarro.
Well, I was going to say the Yoda of all, Navarro, Jack Schaefer, which is kind of funny. The first time I met Joe, probably over a decade ago at a conference, and he just gave this amazing talk on body language and etc. And afterwards, I walked up to him and I told him what I did. And I very rarely ever come in contact with anyone. Most of it's done nowadays over the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So the nonverbals, so forth, as much as they were interesting, I couldn't really apply them. And he said, "Oh, well, you need to read Jack Schaefer." And he gave me, told me one of Jack's first books. I immediately ordered it, and now next month Jack and I, there you go. Next month, Jack and I will be speaking at the same conference down in Orlando, Florida.
That's awesome. Yeah, Jack is a Jedi master of words. It's interesting. You mentioned Navarro and nonverbals, and I was anticipating you saying, again, he's really good at promoting others, never self-aggrandizing, but he would have probably told you also that the way you speak, our voice itself is a nonverbal. And so how you communicate even via telephone and Zoom is extremely important when forging that trust you need to do those relationships.
Well, as I said, mirroring, that's so important to me, and just your pitch, your tone, your cadence tells everything. I can talk to somebody within 10 seconds, whether they're a friend, a stranger, a loved one. I can know if they're happy, mad, glad, or sad just by the sound of their voice, even if it's a total stranger.
What are you looking for when you're listening to those things?
Those things, the pitch, the tone, the overall vibe of the person. It's why I hate texts or email.
Right. No context.
Yeah, you always, and I'm horrible at it. I read someone's text or email in the mood I happen to be in at that particular moment.
Right.
So if I'm aggravated about something and a text comes over, I immediately read the text in a confrontational way, and I'm
Right.
just immediately doing this back. So I've learned over time with texts, especially emails, I'll draft the email, save it to a folder, go back 10 minutes later, reread it, and make sure that's what I want to go out.
Absolutely, because context is so important. When you don't, when you're unable to give context many times in those emails or texts, it's very challenging sometimes to convey accurately and actually read what you're, hopefully trying to be conveyed to you. I know you do an awful lot of teaching in this area as well. And you mentioned you had Jedi masters that you were privileged to interact with. So do you have like 2 or 3 top things that you learned on interpersonal skill building and trust building that you learned that you pass on?
In your conversation that you had with Jack, he had said, or you had said, that you didn't like teaching elicitation because it could become kind of a dark art.
Right.
Well, for me, it's very similar, and it involves pretexting.
Right.
Early in my career, everything was a pretext. I mean, just literally.
Can you describe for our audience what a pretext is?
A pretext is, my name is Bob Jones, and I'm used to work with Robin, trying to get a hold of him. He left some tools with me. So it's basically, no other way to put it, it's a scam.
Yeah, it's a lie.
Yeah,
of some sort, it's a lie.
Yeah, and it's deep manipulation.
Right. Oh, I love that. Yeah, I love that you throw that great adjective in there. Not just manipulation, deep manipulation, because that's what it can be. Sure, keep going.
And a lot of the theories that I've applied to what I do, I didn't know until just the past 5 or 10 years in more advanced studies with folks like you and Joe, etc. They're now scientifically proven events. But I remember at the very first human behavior conference when Chris said, make them better for having met you. Well, when you're doing pretexting, that's kind of hard, because if the person figures out that they just got slickered,
yep,
there's no way to feel good about that. And unless you're doing something like, penetration test, where there's a life lesson or an educational moment at the end that you circle back to, I can see that part. So I just never, with pretexting, ever really just felt good about it. It did, like, not to get into a long religious discussion, but it just did a ping in my spirit all the time.
Sure.
Even though it was successful, and there's no greater rush than finding a skip that you've worked for a long time, no different than you finding a spy or a fugitive, etc. There's no better rush than the guys in custody. In my world, it's they're in the barn, as a phrase that's commonly used. So I had to figure out a different way to do it that made me feel good about not just me, and become more human about it. And now when I'm asked to teach pretexting or hacking or OSNT, because even teaching OSNT can lead to some deep, dark places. It's not called the dark net for, just willy-nilly.
Right.
So I came up with some theories back then that I noticed before I even knew what profiling was, that pretty much every skip, they had different patterns, and in collections and sales, you put things in buckets depending upon where they're at in the cycle. So I was able to put any skip into one of 3 buckets. And once I knew the type of skip it was, it gave me kind of a instant direction to take the file, that I didn't waste time or resources. And one of the things I realized early on is everybody that I come in contact with has hit some sort of speed bump in life,
Mm-hmm.
and they're never positive. Someone just doesn't wake up one day and say, hey, I'm not going to pay anybody. I'm just going to disappear.
Right.
The only person that ever did that in history is the only skip that's never been found, and that's D.B. Cooper.
Right.
And he probably never will be found. So for me, I have to know who someone is before I find out where they are. So when people ask me to teach the dark arts, if you will, I tell them they really don't have to know that. And in my world, it's regulation nation. It's actually illegal to pretext in the fintech space and other spaces.
Sure. Good.
And once you understand human behavior, you really don't have to. So one of the first things I tell people is, look, just you got to get the word skip out of your head. That's just an action. What I focus on is who is the guy, because he did not become a leprechaun or a unicorn. He's doing the same thing he's always done. He's just doing it in a different location with a different group of people.
Right. Forging trust requires, first, you have to humanize. And what you just did there, you took a term that's dehumanizing, a skip, and you're humanizing it, because people pick up on this. And it's not just the individual you're looking for, obviously, but you're interacting with everyone in this person's life. And what you already stated, if you leave someone feeling worse for having met you, what does that do to your personal brand? What's that do to the brand of what you do and your company? It destroys it. And so what you're always doing is you're making that personal connection. You're letting go of deception, which destroys the neurochemistry in the brain. It says that this person is unsafe for me in my life, because, as our great friend Joe Navarro says, his fifth trait of the exceptional person is they create psychological safety for people. And by you humanizing and moving beyond that, it's exactly what you're doing. So I love that. Please continue.
Well, one of the key things in making the entire process, I'm going to use the word simpler, but I'm going to put asterisks around it, because when you're hunting humans, nothing is simple, but is something that I learned from a book that I read that started me on an entirely new path of how I did my job and how I teach. And the book was, I forget who wrote it, but it was a book called It's Not All About Me. And that changed the way I looked at it. And there's one word that encapsulates everything that I do, and it's called empathy.
Right.
And you can't fake empathy. And you and I come from backgrounds that could make you a very jaded individual if you allow it to.
Absolutely.
Now, one thing I've learned is you can have just simple human empathy for somebody, but that doesn't mean you're agreeing with them. It doesn't mean you're passing judgment.
Absolutely.
It's just you're just showing just simple human courtesy.
So, Alex, this is such a great point. And I know a lot of people struggle with empathy because we are bred at a young age to judge the world around us, because our parents teach us to judge for our own safety when we're really small. But as we get older, we realize if we're going to make and forge trust and build relationships and connections, we have to stop judging. We have to be understanding, which is empathy. And you said a key thing there: you can't fake empathy. So how, especially in your world, our world, where we deal with individuals that are making life choices that might not be as healthy for themselves, how do you not fake empathy? What did you learn that could help you not fake empathy that someone else might be able to embody as well?
One simple phrase: there for the grace of God go I.
Nice.
And I don't have, if somebody is addicted to drugs, I don't have to agree with their lifestyle or their habits, but I can understand the addiction because I personally am and have been for almost 50 years addicted to Copenhagen tobacco. I am the biggest addict in the world for soda pop. So caffeine and nicotine are a drug. So I can, by looking at it in that frame of mind, just me internally, I can process it and understand maybe what the individual's going through. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah. And I'm curious, I imagine you are doing this, but I'm curious whether you are or not. When you see someone that is making unhealthy choices in their lives, whether it's through addiction or skipping out on something, because again, no one's born saying, hey, I'm going to do a lot of horrible things to myself and other people. And so when you see someone that you're supposed to find, track down, whatever you want to call it, and you see these behaviors, do you see pain? Do you see the pain they're in that's causing it?
Oh, and that's what I meant about the speed bump
Yeah.
in life that they hit, whether it's a divorce, an addiction, an arrest, it's never a positive thing that happened to them.
Right.
So they are running away from that experience, hoping they're going to leave it behind, not realizing it's just going to follow them. And they're going to, in most cases, repeat the mistake unless they change their own behavior. And that's where our inner circle comes in such a big way, and why I'm emphatic about keeping my inner circle very, very, very clean, very pure. I don't like people that are the negative Nancy's or so forth that are in my inner circle. Now, I don't want somebody that thinks the whole world is, jelly beans and gumdrops either, because it's not. But
positive, optimistic people. That's
yeah.
healthy.
If you
Just
look at
healthy.
if you look at a lot of the stars out there that have been to rehab 10, 15, 20 times, and they just keep repeating the cycle, it's because they go back to the same area, the same inner circle, the same everything. And the mind just isn't meant to beat it because they're going back to what they were comfortable with. So yeah, you instantly, in talking to anybody, you can see and feel the pain. So you kind of got to put, in certain ways, I have a job to do, so I've got to put a force field up to where that doesn't affect what my job is. But I can't tell you how many times that I haven't, or that I have circled back around and brought groceries to somebody, or brought them diapers, or any number of things, just again from that human side, which goes back to make them better for having met you. You've got to talk the talk and walk the walk, right?
Yeah.
So, but empathy can be used in one word. It doesn't, people, here's one thing I love: when someone says, you're going to introduce me to a friend, and you give me the quotation marks, hey, he's real quiet and shy until you get to know him, and then he'll talk your head off. Nobody's like that, really. Everybody on this planet loves to talk. It's the questions we ask, or our attitude, or our general vibe, that shuts them down. We're not talking about stuff they like.
Right.
And that's where if you take it back to where this started, it's not all about me, goes, right. Where once you get them talking about something, anything, and that's where good observational skills comes into play. The insignia on your shirt, the books in the back, a plaque on the wall gives me something to start the conversation with, other than just going straight for the jugular. Because when you do that, or you're battering questions at them and not giving them a chance to reply, you're doing an interrogation and not having a conversation. So your chances are limited to none of gaining information.
So you're talking really well with the skills and tools and techniques of developing rapport pretty rapidly by using the second thing in Joe's book, Be Exceptional, which is observe, not just seeing things, but actually taking in that information and utilizing that information to build that rapport. And a lot of people that understand it at a rudimentary, lower level will just say, hey, I see a picture on your desk, and you just make a comment about the picture on the desk. But you actually take it to that next level of making a connection using things like that. Is there a difference in your minds, like between just doing something surface, and how do you dive deeper on that to forge that trust so it doesn't look like to the other person, oh, he's just trying to schmooze me, he's just trying to give me a line?
It depends what it is, but most of the time I'm sincerely interested, because a lot of this stuff I practice. I go to the mall, airports are my favorite. I sit, I have my headphones on, which are one of the greatest inventions of mankind, because people don't bother to talk to you and you can just sit. When I go to trade shows, I take notes of who's leaving with who for lunch, who's over in the hall talking, and I do it for my own personal enjoyment, because I can see, okay, who's merging with who's doing this. And that's how I kind of have honed my own observation skills. But I said, empathy can be done in just one word. You can just say something as simple as, wow. And depending upon the voice inflection, the facial expression, it can mean 10 different things. Really? And then followed up, tell me more.
What you demonstrate right there is the simple one word, as you say, hitting the third of the four pillars, I believe, of communication. And that is, you are demonstrating that you're validating them non-judgmentally in one word, because you're making, and you use that word sincerely. And I want to unpack that a little bit, because you've mentioned a few times about how you look and feel this way and how genuine it is and how sincere it is. A lot of people ask, well, how do you look sincere? How do you be sincere? How do you truly have empathy? And you're hitting it right here nonstop. And that is, you have great congruence between the things you're saying and the emotions you're having. So your words that you're using are very congruent with your nonverbals of being open, comforting, non-judgmental. Because those things, when you have those congruences there, that is what sincerity is. That's what genuineness is. And that's when you're given great emotional labeling and that non-judgmental validation. That's exactly what you're doing in just one word with lots of congruence. And that one word, was it about you or is it about them? You made it about them.
Well, if we have time, I'll give you a quick little war story that kind of sums what we're talking about up. And I like talking to people. I like practicing different techniques, but even when you're practicing, you have to mean it. But you were in the Marine Corps. Do you have any tattoos at all? Or are you like the only Marine known to man that doesn't have one?
I'm the only Marine known to man that doesn't have one. And if I would have one, it would be an eagle, globe, and anchor, though. Yes, I'd have the Marine Corps emblem. I've tinkered with it a few times.
I love people with tattoos, because tattoos are one of the most personal things someone can do, because you're putting something on your body that is there forever. So it doesn't matter whether they hate it, love it, it's a good memory or a bad memory. It's an instant way to get somebody to start talking.
It's a story.
So I'm at DFW 3 or 4 weeks ago. Plane got delayed. I'm sitting there, and there's sitting right across from me a gentleman and his wife, and right on his forearm, and he's got his sleeves rolled up, and he's got this, his whole forearm has a tattoo on it, and it's a gold brick. And on one side of the brick is sitting a little, like a devil cherub. And on the other side is a little angel cherub, kind of like, the old sits on each shoulder, right?
Right. Uh-huh.
So I saw this tattoo, and just the artwork, the dimension, the three-dimensionalism of it, etc., was just gorgeous. And I just looked over at him and said, "Excuse me, sir, I love your tattoo. The color, the saturation, the line work, everything is just beautiful." And he said, "Well, thank you very much. I got it such and such." And the next thing I know, this guy begins to tell me that this tattoo symbolizes he was in the hedge fund world, and he became very, very successful. The more successful he got, the more destructive he got. And he was cheating on his wife with multiple women. He got involved with every drug you could think of. And again, the more successful he got, the more he spiraled. And his wife refused to give up on him. And they went through counseling. He went to rehab. So for the next 10 minutes, this guy's telling me what happened over the past 5 years. His wife chimes in. She shakes my hand. I know where he worked, where he now works. They're heading to Vegas to renew their vows. And it was all from just it's a gorgeous tattoo. And knowing enough about tattoos to say the color saturation's great and the line work perfect. I probably threw a couple, wow, you're kidding me, in there without trying to remember the conversation verbatim. It's an instance that happened that I now use in my class because it proves that was a perfect stranger that simply extending a hand, paying a compliment, whatever, noticing something. And I was genuinely interested, especially when I see, a gorgeous tattoo or a symbol that I don't recognize on someone's shirt or hat. I may ask them, excuse me, I'm sorry to bother you. What does that mean? They can't wait to tell me.
You had curiosity. And so even though you might not even been saying anything, this is a critical skill as well. I think people can really take away, and that is non-judgmentally, non-verbally, non-judgmental. That's also, so you're hearing all these things that potentially from anyone's background that might be a super religious or ethical or moral, and you're hearing all these horrendous things. A lot of people would recoil at that. They would have nonverbal stress. They'd lean back, they'd lean away, they'd fold their arms, they'd grimace, they'd compress their lips, they would sit there and non-judgmentally judge them non-verbally. So even without saying it, so people can often get confused because they'll say, well, I never said anything negative to him. Yeah, but you look like you did. You were cognating that you don't like this person, the things they're saying, and you were leaking it non-verbally. So that is what I think the huge takeaway when you, Alex, engage someone, you talk about empathy and you talk about sincerely doing it and meaning it, is because you have congruence. You are, as you said, before the grace of God go I, walk a mile, and it's the same thing as I do with law enforcement, say, walk a mile in their shoes, and what decisions and choices would you be faced with? What would you have done in those situations? And that's what empathy is trying to understand someone's point of view from the things that they've experienced.
It's not my job professionally or personally to judge anybody's decision, because God knows I've made a bunch of bad ones.
Absolutely.
That was one thing the last guest you had on, I think you could have her on 10 or 12 more times with all the content that she had to share, talking about, toxic cultures.
Oh, is that Judy?
Yeah, I think COVID might have taught me more than anything. And I mean, hundreds of thousands, depending upon what news you listen to, million, whatever, passed away, lives were destroyed. COVID wasn't altogether a overall bad experience for me. I had a very positive career path kind of change, but it allowed me to slow down. I stayed here in what we jokingly refer to as Guru Manor.
Right.
And I gobbled up every book, every class I could take. I went through Chase's certifications. I went through yours, etc. So I took it as almost a vision quest, but I also got to spend more time with my spouse of 38 years than I have in over a decade.
Right.
On the back porch, using the flat top, etc.
And for those listening, he's referencing the last guest I had on when the show's recorded is Judy Ryan. So listening on that, he's mentioned his course that he took from Chase. He's referencing Chase Hughes and his institute that he teaches through. So anyway, go ahead.
And so there was just so much that happened during COVID that we all had to learn. We all had to learn how to use Zoom to keep these interpersonal experiences going, because we are social creatures. If Facebook has proved nothing more than that, it's proved we're social creatures with over 1 billion users. So that's one of the things that still allowed me to learn and grow in my industry and go from teaching on site to teaching Zooms and still be able to have ways to practice what I'm doing now, looking at the books in your background, that handsome fellow in the cowboy hat on the screen behind you, things like that.
Yes. That's a good shot, by the way, of you. I love that
As
shot.
you can see, that's a very, not too old. That picture is probably 10 years old. I was about 80 pounds heavier and a lot less.
No, Alex. No. That was taken just last week. You got to stick with the story.
True. Very, very, very true.
It's a great way to wrap it up there. And who knew we'd spend the entire time talking about empathy, but it is so powerful and it's so correct and it's so proper to think in terms of the fact that with empathy, that becomes your personal brand. It's the only thing you can do in a world where a lot of people sell the same widget. Who are you going to go buy the widget from? The person actually makes the effort to make that connection, or the person that's actually in it for themselves and in for profit? People pay for service and they'll pay for that connection because it's genuine. It's when it's sincere. All those things matter immensely. That's where it all starts. And that's where it all ends.
I told you I'm one of the most blessed people that you've ever met, because when you look at me, I'm the sum total of those that have mentored me along the way. And I'm currently the director of training and development for a data company called Locate Smarter. And they're very similar to, say, I'm sure you used them back when you were jet setting on the plane at the FBI, that private jet that y'all got to use.
We each had our own.
Yeah, I know the story about the car you drove around New York that the doors were welded shut.
Yeah, that was great. Oh my gosh, it was a bluesmobile.
But these guys have the coolest culture at Locate Smarter, and they mean it. I mean, their mission statement is very simple: we care. And they're a data company similar to, say, like a LexisNexis.
Right.
And you had talked early on, the only thing technology's really done from early 80s through now is it's helped us gather intel. We live in the information age. Better than that, we can have it now. What used to take me weeks and months to gather, I can gather with a click. But the different podcasts you've had recently, each one of them spoke in a different way. I had to grab Jack Schaefer's book, The Like Switch, again, and I'm reading it again because he talked about some things I somehow must have missed that paragraph.
Alex, I can't believe how much time has flown by chatting about this, but it is time. We got to wrap it up. But I want to make sure that people know where to go to find out more about you, and whether they want to use your services or whether they just want to learn how to do things like you do them. Where can people contact you?
I am very active on LinkedIn. Just look for Alex SKIPGURU Price. I have a private Facebook group called Skip Guru's Tribe.
It's a great one. I'm on it.
Yes, that you're a member of, and several others. But all my contact info will be in the show notes.
Yeah, and for those listening, please check out the show notes because Alex provided a voluminous amount. I'll put links to it all up there, and it's really good stuff. So please check all that out.
And I'll anybody can reach out to me through my blog at skipguru.com and see new training dates. I'll be doing some online trainings very shortly. I do private trainings.
Nice. Busy man and busy times. Alex, I can't thank you enough for spending the time coming on the show and opening people's eyes to, in every single industry, people don't understand the power and the impact that empathy has. And even in an industry where people think that shouldn't or doesn't need to be, it actually has that big impact. And so I thank you for coming on and sharing that. And I will definitely be seeing you and chatting with you again soon.
I'll end with how I do all my trainings. Everyone, it's been my honor. I felt like Luke Skywalker talking to Yoda on what a lightsaber is, but I'll end with everybody. Be blessed, be safe, and happy hunting. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Forged by Trust. If you enjoyed the show, took away a few new tools, I hope you will leave a great review of the show to show your support. If you are interested in more information about how to forge your own trust building strategies, please visit my website at www.peopleformula.com. You can also follow me on my social media sites included in the show notes. I am looking forward to sharing my next Forge by Trust episode with you soon.